That was the first act of rebellion that launched the French Revolution. If you were caught, you were brought to this Parliament city where you were condemned to death. Part of quality of life is that you pay super high taxes, maybe up to 50% of your income. The Italian mafia is here in the city. So finally what happened is the Nazis said, we've had enough. Hard and devastating and demoralizing is good. And we're gonna head right now to one of the more notorious areas of the city. And here you can see where cars have been burned right here.
We're coming to you from Grenoble, France, where my friend Mark is going to give us a little tour around this, I guess, ancient city. It's almost 2,000 years old, so far as we know, and going to learn some really interesting stuff, so I hope you stick around.
Yeah, the town was called Calaro. When it was first founded, it was dedicated to the Emperor Gratian, and so it's first called Grenopolis, and then that kind of morphed into Grenoble, I think. The proper way you say it in French is Grenoble, but if you're just a normal English-speaking average person, we just say Grenoble. So Grenoble, yeah, is a city of about 600,000 people, and in the metro area, it's probably about the 10th largest city in France. It's got a university, about 60,000 students, so 1 out of every 10 people is a student, so it's a young population here. It is the Silicon Valley of France. So there's a lot of tech industry here. They kind of major in nanotechnology. There's a lot of tech research that goes on, biomedical research. We've got a particle accelerator here that scientists from all over Europe will come and they will rent time to do their experiments. So the Atomic Energy Association is here. So it's a city that is diverse, dynamic, and attracts a lot of internationals. So we're walking in one of the oldest areas of the city. We have a Notre Dame church back there, which is probably where the city first started. And we're in an area called Saint-Clair and Les Halles. And it's just a kind of a walking district, so you can't really drive in here. One of the great things about some of the cities in Europe and especially in France is you'll have these walking districts that cars are really not allowed to come into, and so you can do your shopping and eating in cafes and not be bothered by a bunch of traffic and a bunch of noise, a bunch of pollution. So that's one of the great things about.
But you've got like a trolley system going on here?
Yeah, so we have a tram. There's about 5 different lines that go through the city. And got train system, bus system. We don't have an underground, don't have a metro. A lot of bikes. These yellow ones right here you can rent for the week or the month. And then they also have bikes where you can just rent by swiping your credit card or your debit card, and they're all battery operated. And they're either scooters or bikes as well. They're a blue color. So it's really easy to get around. They say that Grenoble is one of the flattest cities in Europe, which is amazing because you're going to see later how many mountains there are around here. We're surrounded by 3 major mountain ranges.
Back there, well, I guess you can't see it now, but we saw earlier, you can see massive mountains. We're in a big valley, basically.
Yeah, so a glacier valley. So it just flattened everything out, and you can get around really easy. Today, it's the beginning of August. And everyone goes away on vacation for the month of August. So
the entire country of France, or?
Yeah, basically they all head either to Spain or to the beaches, even to mountain camping and resorts. They leave the cities and get out of town. So that's kind of what's happening around us today. I'm going to take us over here. This building right here is super old, and it actually is significant in June 7th, 1788 is a day called the Day of the Tiles. And Grenoble is actually known as what they call the cradle of the French Revolution, meaning that the revolution started here. So what happened is the king at that time, the nobility and the clergy and the royalty were all in cahoots, and they were corrupt, and you had Versailles, all the opulence. And there was so much unrest and fomenting of opposition that the king decided to open up Parliament to the working class, to the sort of what they call the third tier or the third section. And when the votes didn't start to go their way, he decided, oh, I'm going to pull this back. And so he tried to shut Parliament down. Well, Grenoble is a Parliament city, and the people, the Parliament of Grenoble refused to close. And so the king sent troops down here to break up Parliament, and what they did is they went up on the roofs. You can see up here on the roof here, there are these tiles, these red tiles. They got up on the roofs, and they took the tiles and spontaneously began to throw them down on top of the heads of the troops in an act of rebellion. And they said that was the first act of rebellion that launched the French Revolution. It started here, and then it moved to Paris, and it was a year later that the Bastille was stormed, and July 14th, which is the launch of the official revolution. But it started here in Grenoble. This is one of our trams that we use. A lot of students find it really cheap. It's easy to...
How much would something like that cost for a ride then?
One ride is like a €1.50, so let's say $1.75. But if you're a student under 25, you can get a month pass for about 19 euros, and you can go anywhere in the city unlimited. So Victor Hugo, famous French author who wrote Les Miserables, which probably one of the more famous French works that most people know. He did some writing here, and there's a square named after him. He said that Grenoble is the city with a view at the end of every street. We have a lot of outdoor sports, obviously. So the Winter Olympics were here in 1968. So we have things that are left over from that, an infrastructure of ski resorts, skating rinks. There's a lot of mountain climbing here, a lot of mountain biking. In the winter, a lot of cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, a lot of hiking, a lot of they call alpinism, which is kind of your hardcore climbing up the face of sheer cliffs and all.
So does the population really grow here drastically in the winter?
It does, in and out, What happens is people will go to the ski resort for a week. They'll arrive on Saturday and leave the next Saturday, and so that's when you don't want to be on the roads. It's because the people coming and people going from all over France to get here to ski, they're all on the roads at the same time, and there can be big traffic jams.
And are there big ski resorts just a few minutes away? Or?
Yeah, so the closest one is a ski resort called Champs, and it's where the downhill events were during the '68 Olympics. It's where Jean-Claude Killy won the gold medal for France during that time, and it's probably the closest one. It's probably 30 minutes from here to get up to that resort. There's some well-known ones. One of them is Les Deux Alpes, where you can ski year-round. They have a glacier up there you can ski on, but it's expensive, and say right now, because you have to get a helicopter to take you up there.
So in the winter, what would it cost for kind of a pass?
Yeah, it's really cheap. It's really reasonable. You can get an all-day pass for about 25 euros.
Really?
And then you can rent your equipment for about the same amount. So you could ski all day with, and rent your equipment for about 50. So let me tell you a little bit about this fountain right here. People kind of know, France was famous for their guillotine, right, during the French Revolution, cutting off of people's heads. But also what people don't know is there was another violent period that all of France went through. They call it the Wars of Religion. So from about the middle 16th century, 1550, to about 1650, the king of France at that time, he felt like for France to be united, everyone needed to be Catholic like he was. And so he began to outlaw any other religion besides Catholicism. It was right after the Reformation, and a lot of Martin Luther and John Calvin's writings were getting influence, and the Protestant church was growing and growing. But basically, they refused to stop to meet, and it became so tense that there was a lot of fighting, rebellion, and imprisonments, arrests, and all that. If you were a Protestant during the Wars of Religion and you refused to recant and just become again a Catholic, and again, all you had to do was say, yeah, I'm going to become a Catholic. And the thing they didn't want you to do was to read the Bible for yourself, to perform your own baptisms, and to meet for prayer. That was illegal. And people that thought just that basic part of their faith was so essential they wanted to give it up, they were willing to give their lives for it. And many of them did, because as they tried to escape to Geneva, which is about 2 hours by car from here, if you were caught, you were brought to this Parliament city where you were condemned to death. And you were either hung at the gallows right here where this fountain is, and body dragged through the streets and thrown in the river. Or if you're a woman, you were condemned to a tower prison. If you were a child, you were taken from your parents and forced to become Catholic. So later on, this is where the guillotine was during the Revolution. It's kind of execution square. But now, obviously, it's transformed into a real beautiful fountain with lots of restaurants and carousel for kids. But you wouldn't know some of the terror and some of the blood, some of the gore that happened right here in this square back in the day. And the story is this, is that there's a period in Napoleon's history where he was exiled to the Isle of Elba and in Italy. And so the General Marchand was trying to keep him out of the country, but he tried to make a comeback, and he entered France clandestinely through the south and made his way back to Paris. Well, the general found out about it and sent troops down to intercept him, and as he came north and they came south, they met right outside of Grenoble at a place called the Prairie of the Encounter. And the story goes like this, is that, you know, Napoleon and his men come and meet them, and they start to aim their rifles at him. They're going to arrest him, and he says something like, hey, if you can shoot your emperor, go ahead. And it says they break down crying and they can't do it, and they join him and they march with him back to Paris, and he gets crowned emperor again. So what he said, he spent the night here, and what he said was, in Elba, the island he was exiled in, I was a vagabond. But he said, in Grenoble, I was crowned emperor again.
So the only experience most people, kind of have of France, at least most Americans, is probably Paris, right?
Yeah.
They go to Paris, they're there for a few days or the week, and then they kind of go back, or they kind of have an idea of what people are like in Paris, right? What are people like, what are French people like in Grenoble?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, Paris has, millions of visitors every year. And because English is the international language, I think a lot of people don't even, well, first of all, they don't think they speak French very well, but then they don't take the time to even say, really, what are the 4 or 5 magic words in French? It's like, bonjour, hello, merci, thank you, s'il vous plaît, which is please, have a nice day, bonne journée, and au revoir, goodbye. And so, can you imagine if someone came to visit the United States and they couldn't even say hello, goodbye, thank you? That's what we Americans do, when we go to this place like Paris. And so, if you're a Parisian and you just see tourist after tourist after tourist, finally you're like, oh man. And so attitudes come out, and guess what? Maybe someone doesn't get treated right. They go back to America and say, oh, the Parisians, man, they were so rude to me. So people come afraid, and they're like, oh, I can't speak French, they're gonna criticize it. And then it just perpetuates. And so people that only go to Paris sometimes can have a less than favorable experience. But here in Grenoble, most of the foreigners that Grenoble people experience are scientists, students, people that get jobs here. And those people are more likely to integrate, learn the culture, learn the language a bit. And so your average Grenoble person has a much more favorable outlook, say, on foreigners in their city. But here's the thing, even Grenoble people don't like Parisians. I mean, nothing against Parisians, but I mean, there's a reputation, it's like, Paris is its own unique thing, and many people will come to a place like Grenoble and they'll say, man, people are so nice. And really, that's the case here. People really are nice, and you don't have to be afraid of a typical sort of a stereotypical French attitude.
What would people in Grenoble think of Americans?
Well, I mean, Grenoblans, or Grenoblois as we're called, would say that your typical American is loud and and maybe a little wasteful. Drives a big car, doesn't really care about the environment that much, but also friendly, you know? I mean, so I think there's a little bit of an envy of how, of how friendly we can be with strangers, just talking to people in line. The French have a very strict view of like individuality and a bubble that kind of protects them from that sort of social space being invaded. There's a great book called The Bonjour Effect, and the Bonjour Effect is describing how if I'm going to like cross that space and enter into your personal space, I kind of have to get permission, and the way I get permission is to say bonjour. So for instance, if I want to walk up to a policeman to ask directions or buy a ticket from somebody, if I don't say bonjour first, it's almost like I slapped them in the face. I need to enter their space by announcing that I'm going to do that and get their permission by exchanging a bonjour with them, and that kind of helps. And so just understanding some of those little intricacies of culture and expectation kind of make a big difference as to how you're treated. And
So like as an American, we can be like this, or we can kind of come up to you and
Yeah.
we're used to that. But
Yeah.
in France, they're not like that, so
Yeah.
to speak. It's more, you stay over here and,
yeah, you don't chat people up in line.
okay.
It's just not appropriate, to
Like
talk to strangers.
in America, we'd just be like, oh, where are you from? What do
Yeah.
you do for a living? That
Right,
sort of thing.
exactly.
That's not,
It's pretty rare. Yeah, but
Okay.
you know what? They come to expect it from an American, and so they kind of are like, oh yeah, Americans are like that. But it really is kind of it doesn't feel natural, and it is a little invasive.
yeah. Sometimes in the U.S. you'll hear France referred to as like, oh, it's a socialist country or something like that.
Yeah.
Are people less concerned about money here, or what's the attitude towards careers, making money, wealth, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, when we first came, we were a little frustrated because we come from a capitalistic country where the customer's king, to be honest. And so earning the dollar and earning the customer's return visit, pleasing the customer in a restaurant or a store is super big. And here you come and they could really care less about, pleasing you necessarily. We would want to go to a store at noon during our lunch hour and it'd be closed down. And we're like, man, don't people know about like staggered lunch hours and that kind of thing? But quality of life is number one. So even though they could have staggered lunch hours, they want to give their employees a full 2-hour lunch break. And so making a buck and earning a lot of money isn't as important as quality of life. So there's a balance there, right? But part of quality of life is that you pay super high taxes, maybe up to 50% of your income. And so, but there's a lot of social services where you're taken care of with free education, free healthcare. So you're kind of taken care of from cradle to grave. And there's just not a lot of motivation to make money hand over fist. It's all about slowing life down. So for instance, if you have a to-go cup of coffee in your hand, you're walking around, people are like, you're too busy. Slow down, enjoy your coffee. You don't have to walk around, So everything slows down. And you know what? France has the number 2 largest amount of centenarians in the world, next to Japan, which means people live long lives here. Part of it's the diet, part of it's the lifestyle. And I kind of think they're onto something. And I've learned how just to adjust my expectations and to go, you know what? I do need to slow life down and not be in such a hurry and so upset when I'm not weighted on hand and foot and people are trying to earn my dollar, So that's...
So if you were to, let's say, end up on the street homeless or something like that, are there a lot of services to help you here?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that's kind of a rare thing to see homelessness around here?
No,
or?
you see it for sure, but I think a lot of it's because of mental health as well, like in the States. So there's definitely services, and there's a lot of associations. So community service is huge here. There's these nonprofit, they call associations here, that many people volunteer in because there are gaps. The government can't take care of every social need, and there's a lot of volunteerism here. The French people are really into that and really serving their community. But even so, you will find, that there are a lot of homeless, especially like here in Grenoble, you'll see it. But it's because their lives are more complicated than just there's no resources for them. There's a lot of other reasons why they're on the street.
All right, well, where are we headed
go
up here? What is this?
We're going to go up in what's called the téléphérique, but it's our cable cars that go up to a place called the Fort or La Bastille, and we'll get a great view of the city from up there.
Okay,
and
great.
a great view as we go up in the cars.
So this is the thing that all the tourists will come to.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
It's the touristy spot. Okay, so what were you saying? During COVID, what was this like?
So during COVID, a lot of the restaurants were closed, or terraces were open with limited seating, and the French weren't used to takeaway. Maybe pizza you take away from a cart or a trailer, but you couldn't even find to-go boxes. If you ordered a to-go box from a restaurant, they'd be offended. They didn't even have them, and then they started getting them for a while. But then during COVID, they had to have them because people would take their food away. And so it just kind of became a thing where now more people are used to, taking their food and eating it outside. Hey, you see these colorful houses here on the other side of the river?
Yeah.
On the ground floor is pizzeria after pizzeria after pizzeria.
Really? Why?
Yeah, well, you think, well, why so many? Well, what happened is there was a glove making industry, for the really special gloves for rich people that people used to wear, especially women, very dainty and very ornate, expensive. The Italian glove making industry came over here and were making gloves, and a lot of these properties were in the hands of Italian families. Well, when the glove making industry ran out, the property stayed in Italian hands, and they ended up opening up Italian restaurants on the ground floor.
So this is like a very high Italian population, right?
It is. We're only about an hour and a half from the Italian border. The closest big city is Torino or Turin, and the Italian mafia is here in the city.
Oh.
So they say. I believe them.
Yeah, and they are great people. We're not going to say anything negative.
Oh, no, not at all. Nothing negative, man.
So is it the best pizza you've ever had here? Don't insult the
I'm not going to
Sicilians.
say it's the best pizza I've ever had, but it's pretty good.
Okay.
So wherever you see the red roofs, that's the old city. That's the original, older part of the city, and then beyond that is what built up, over probably the 20th century on. So we're surrounded by 3 mountain ranges. This is the Vercors. It's where there's a lot of cross-country skiing, ski resorts. Back over to our right, or behind us there, you can't really see them that well. They're covered by, you can see the peak right above those clouds. That's how high they are. They're about 11,000 feet. That is the Belle Dune range, and that's really the start of the true Alps. The French Alps is there, and then there's another range that's up back behind this mountain that we're on right now, called the Chartreuse. And some people know Chartreuse as a color. It's like a fluorescent green kind of a color, but it's also a liqueur. And there's a monastery back in those mountains where the monks made this liqueur, Chartreuse, and it's famous all over the world.
Wow. This is the place to spend a Sunday.
There's a street down here that is supposed to be the longest unbroken street in Europe, they say. So it's not broken up by a monument or a statue or a traffic circle, a roundabout, kind of a thing.
It's just straight.
It's just straight.
Do you know how long it is?
It's miles and miles. It changes names 3 times. That's
Really?
how long it is. Yeah, different names further down you go. This is run by the French army. They're called the Alpine troops.
Okay.
They're the ones that if you ever see a French soldier who's wearing a beret, that's the symbol of the Alpine troops that they use. And they're sent all over the world, especially in places where there's a lot of snow and mountains and skiing and, like the Balkans during the Balkan War. So let me tell you a story about World War II.
Yeah.
So, when the Germans got to Paris, the French gave in because the general, Pétain was his name. He was leading the French army, and he had actually gone through well, he was the president, and he was a former general, and he had gone through World War I, and he had seen how many French people, Germans, Europeans had lost their lives, and he said, we don't want to lose a whole generation like that again. So he capitulated, he gave in. Well, when France gave in, this is a garrison city. It's always been a garrison city where there was army troops here. And they refused to give in, and they went into the hills. And they formed these spontaneous, clandestine resistance groups. And they were supplied weapons secretly, airdropped by the Allies. The university here, they were trying to, the German army would try to recruit young men to go over in what's called the STO, or the work programs, to help fuel the Nazi war machine. If they refused to go, they could sneak out and join these troops. So there was troops in this mountains, those mountains. There was, maybe 26 different, they were called the Maquis. They fought a war of attrition and sabotage the entire war. They would sneak into town where the Gestapo and the SS was. They would blow up munition depots. They would blow up bridges. They would cause all kinds of havoc. So finally what happened is the Nazis said, we've had enough. We're gonna flush them out of these mountains once and for all. And they sent 20,000 troops here to finish the task right before D-Day. So when D-Day happened, there were 20,000 less German troops there to defend the borders of Normandy than there would have been because of what was happening here in Grenoble. So Grenoble played an indirect role in the victory, it really did. And so Grenoble was the only city in all of France that was awarded a medal by the first president, Charles de Gaulle, and he awarded the medal of Companion of the Resistance. Yeah, so Grenoble has always been known as a city of refuge. So not only did they harbor Jews during World War II, but during those wars of religion, what happened is there was a Protestant duke, his name was Lesdiguières. He had a kind of a small army, and he penetrated the Catholic forces' perimeter, and he took the city, and he made it into a Protestant haven for persecuted Protestants. So it was transformed to a place where Protestants were killed and persecuted to where they were actually harbored and protected during the second half of the wars of religion. There was a civil war that was fought between Algeria and France. So it was like their Vietnam. It was an unpopular war. Algeria was trying to secede from France, and they lost the war. And there were Algerians who were either employed by the French government, they were called harkis, or they fought with the French troops against their own people because they believed in a unified Algeria, France. So when they tried to come back to France, there was also another group called the Pieds Noirs. They were called, which means black feet. And who they were is they were French citizens who lived in this territory of France, Algeria, but it was French territory. They were raised there, born there, lived there for families for generations. They had to flee as well when they lost the war. And so the harkis and the Pieds Noirs, when they tried to come into France, no one wanted them because it was like the economy wasn't good. We don't want to give you jobs. We don't have housing for you. And by the way, you're an embarrassment because we lost this war. Kind of like what Vietnam vets experienced when they came back into America. But Grenoble was one of the first cities that opened wide its arms and said, we'll take you. And so that's why we have double the amount of North Africans and Algerians in population percentage than your average that is in the rest of France. Because it started out as a sanctuary city. It's always been a refuge city. So Grenoble had a history of catastrophic flooding because two major rivers flow in the city. The Drac, which comes from the Écrin National Mountains, and then also from over here near Geneva, there is the Isère, which is like a really windy river. And for years, because of the runoff of the snow, they would just have like massive flooding until they learned how to use taming the river and harness it for hydroelectric power. So in 1924, Grenoble hosted one of the first international symposiums or gatherings for hydroelectric power. And there's a tower right down here you can see in the middle of this park. It looks kind of like the Tower of Mordor, even though it has a blue light at night instead of a red light at the top. But it's in the middle of what we call Park Mistral. That is the only remaining structure from that exposition on hydroelectric power, where 1 million people came to Grenoble over the course of a year to learn about hydroelectric power and to benefit from this sort of a World's Fair type of a thing. Grenoble's always attracted the nations, have always come here. So we have a science research mecca. We have international students, maybe 10% of the student population is international students from around the world. We've got scientists and physicists and biomedical researchers and people that come from everywhere in order to study here, to work here, to do research here. And we also hosted the Olympics in '68, so it's always been a place that has attracted the nations as well. So we're considered one of the greenest cities in Europe. In fact, our mayor is one of the only Green Party mayors of a city over 100,000 people in the whole country. So you might see a lot of overgrowth here. Two things people notice. One is there's a lot of just overgrowth, but the reason is because they would rather have it look like unkempt and overgrown than use the gas-powered weed eaters to clean it up. So they'll only do that once a year, and they'll do it right before what we call rentrée, or the back to school, because September is like January in the sense that all the new calendars and planners start in September, not January. People make New Year's resolutions starting in September, not January. So back to school is actually the whole story. If you're going to renovate your business or repaint your home, you're going to do it in August to get ready for September. They'll go through and they'll clean up and they'll get the weeds in late August once a year. But other than that, it looks really overgrown and ugly. But it's really because behind it all is a commitment to be ecological and planet friendly.
Are there other programs the city runs to try to be more ecological?
Yeah, a lot of recycling, of course. I mean, we recycle everything, glass, paper products, cardboard, and it's pretty strictly enforced. Like your male men and women will be riding bikes. So they ride pedal bikes because they don't want them as a city employee using kind of environment polluting gas-powered things. All the buses here are run by natural gas, and anything that the government provides is also natural gas as well.
Well, that was a great ride up there and tour the city from up above. Thanks, Mark. We're gonna go see a couple more things now and get out of this heat box.
Yeah, we're gonna get an air-conditioned car.
Get an air-conditioned car. I have already turned red. My fair Nordic skin is no match for the sun of the French Alps. We're driving around here a little bit. Gonna go see a couple other spots, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about the language in France. I know that a lot of people have said that, well, most French people actually speak English. They just don't want to because, they don't want to speak to Americans or something like that. And what's your kind of take on that? Does most everyone speak English here, or what's the reasoning for not wanting to speak that all the time?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Like, there's a difference between what people understand and could speak or engage with, and then what they actually do. But the fact that our daughter grew up here, I mean, from the time she was 9 till she was 18 and she graduated. So she went through French school system, and we observed firsthand the phenomenon of how teachers in general, this is a stereotype, but treat students. So, French education system is super tough. They grade on a scale of 0 to 20 instead of 0 to 100. And French teachers will never give you a 20. It's almost impossible to get a 20 because teachers feel like if too many students succeeded on my exam, I made it too easy. So hard and devastating and demoralizing is good because you teach them a lesson that you got to work harder. they will call students from a young age, we're talking primary school, kindergarten, they'll call them imbeciles, stupid, idiots, nothings. They'll swear at them, they'll scream at them. And it's, it's sad. Things that in America that would get teachers fired here are accepted. And so your average French student or French person growing up, the thing that they hate the most or they're most afraid of is public ridicule. And so they don't want to stand out, and they don't want to be proven wrong or told that they can't do something or they're insufficient at something, because they've grown up with such an inferiority complex about how they've been treated. So most French people, though they were born speaking French, understanding French, are taught to believe they don't speak French good at all. They get low grades in it, and they're told they're horrible at it. So you got to imagine, if you're a French person born in France and you don't think you speak good French, certainly you're not going to think you speak good English, and therefore you don't want to embarrass yourself by trying to speak English to someone who is like an Anglophone. So it has more to do with more of a fear and actually a bit of an inferiority. Because everyone, if you've ever learned a language, you know that if you're afraid of making a mistake, you'll never speak a foreign language. You've got to get out there and try it and make mistakes and be willing to sound foolish. And the French have just been like, their psyche's been formed to where they just don't want to do that. And so we find that, they may not speak English to you, not because they're proud and arrogant or don't want to engage with you. It's just this is the kind of thing that may be forming their attitude about it.
Like, I know that a lot of times when I've been in Paris or wherever else, and I'll have an Uber driver or somebody working at a restaurant, and I'll ask him, do you speak English? Because I don't speak any French.
Yeah.
And they'll say, no, or
Yeah.
very little. If you're saying they all do speak English to some sort of a conversational level, which it sounds like is what you're saying, then how do you get them to actually converse in English instead of just shutting them down?
Yeah, the way I've learned to do it is to just flip the script and come in humbly, and instead of saying, do you speak English, as if to put them on the back foot, like you're deficient, or it'd be like saying to someone, do you have your doctorate? That sounds condescending, because most people don't. But what I say is, hey, I'm sorry, I don't speak French, and that automatically puts them in the sort of the helper position and you in the learner position, and you'll get a much better response that way. It's the number one college town for quality of student life in France, voted, by students. Because of the open space, the sports, the mountains, the outdoors, and then we're one of the only campuses that is like a U.S. style campus.
What do you mean by that?
Well, everything's right there. All the classes, the dormitories, the student union, it's all right there. Most of the European universities didn't have like a master planning, and so one faculty sprouted up in one part of the city, and then the business part's in one part, the medical another, the engineering another. So you don't have a sense of continuity or kind of unified coming together in one geographical spot. So in a lot of cities in Europe, to go to university is like going to work. You take your backpack or your briefcase, you go to class, you go home. There's not a lot of community student life going on because you're in the middle of an urban environment and it's just one building. Whereas we have the advantage of having a student culture and a community that is a big campus that's a huge acreage. The city donated it to the university, and they built it up in the 60s and the 70s.
What do you love about living here?
Oh, I love the lifestyle. It is really a great quality of life. Life gets slowed down. What I love is how relationships are so important here. Most French people don't have a lot of friendships. They have a few friendships, and they go super, super deep with those friends. And so I like that. I like the priority of relationships and family that the French have. And I like the fact they're committed to quality of life. I like the beauty, of course, of living here in France. And there's a lot of culture here, whether it's the arts or the cuisine or the art scene. I love being around artists and creativity, but I also love the outdoors. If you gave me a week's vacation all paid and you said you can stay by the beach or you can go to the mountains and stay in a cabin near a lake, I'm going to take the mountains, 10 times out of 10. So I think I'm in the right place.
Are there things that you miss about the U.S. living here?
Yeah, again, the other thing, I miss family, I miss relationships, I miss variety. Here in France, I could take you to your average sort of French restaurant, and I could tell you probably 6 out of 10 things that are going to be on the menu, and I could predict their dessert menu probably, to a T. Because here in France, variety is not the thing. It's to do the traditional thing, but to do it the best or better than it's ever been done. So you don't do a different kind of bechamel sauce. You do the best bechamel that anyone's ever tasted, but you do it according to the way bechamel's always been made. That's kind of like a little bit of the French mentality. What's interesting is that there is a museum here in Grenoble called Musée Dauphinois, which is the name of the little department. And there is a section which is the history of the Alpine people. And they have these wooden brands that you see. They're on the ends of long poles, and there's a brand. And you think they're for cows, but they're actually for bread. So what happens is that up above the tree line in the Alps, wood is a rare commodity. And so they could only have fires to bake bread a few times a year, and that oven was a community oven in the village, and everybody would bring their dough and they would bake their bread in the oven, and then it would be kept throughout the year, but you would brand your bread with your family's brand so everybody would know whose bread was whose. So when you think about it, if you've got old bread, what's the best thing to do with old bread but to put it in some really hot cheese? So that's kind of our theory as to maybe where fondue came from and why it's an Alpine thing. So we're heading down this longest street in Europe right now, and we're just at the beginning of it. But we're heading to an area where they're called quartier difficile, which means a difficult neighborhood. So euphemism. Another name might be quartier chaud, or a hot area. Yeah, another name, I don't know, might be a quartier défavorisé, or a defavored neighborhood. And yeah, these are just areas where a lot of immigrants and foreigners and people lower income, minorities end up having to find sort of cheap housing, and then they're kind of forgotten, rundown places that end up just accentuating the imbalance and the marginalization that happens, in these kind of neighborhoods.
Is there project housing where you can't afford a place to live, then you're going to live there? The government's going to provide it, that sort of thing?
It's called HLM housing, and these are areas in the city that the city has to build for low income. If you want to get government assistance, you're required by law to provide so many rooms or so many lodgings that would be for people that don't have access to affordable housing, and they're subsidized by the government. So every commune, every small town, every city would have these areas that they have built just for that.
What does rent cost here? What is kind of the cost of living?
Yeah, here in Grenoble, it's not as expensive as, say, in Paris and some of the other big cities. And it depends on what part of the city you're in. So let's say just right around here, which is probably not a very affluent area at all. A 2 or a 3 bedroom apartment might cost you about 800 euros a month to rent, but it's going to be very small.
So what is that, about 850 US dollars a month, something like that? 820?
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. And you can even
Okay.
find cheaper than that.
Mm.
It all depends.
So if you wanted to live in a nicer area, what would it kind of cost?
You'd probably be looking at 1,500 to 1,800 euros, which would be about $2,000.
Mm.
You see this sign up here that says Village Olympique. So Village Olympique
Okay.
is where the old Olympic Village was for the '68 Olympics.
Oh.
And this is where they would house the athletes. And so the buildings are named after Scandinavian, they're named after Japan, but they've become low income slum areas. Some of them were used as dormitories for the university, but they've been even given up, and now squatters inhabit them, and it's become more of a slum area, but it's the former Olympic Village. And we're going to head right now to one of the more notorious areas of the city. When we first moved here in July of 2010, the night before we arrived, there had been about 500 cars that were spontaneously burned by mainly North African protesters. What had happened is the police had a reputation for brutality, and they had chased somebody who had robbed a casino that was up in a spa town and came down into some of these buildings over here. And as they chased them into these buildings, one of them got electrocuted inside of a kind of a control room, and people got mad at the police, and they burned all these cars everywhere. The president came to try to quell the violence, but he made some insensitive comments, and he just made it worse, and it blew up again. And so we began to get sort of aware of these super needy areas where, in these buildings back over here, this is where they built them in the 1970s as a social experiment. And they moved about half of your traditional French white Europeans, and then half immigrants and North Africans, Muslims and other religions into these buildings here. And it's called Villeneuve, new town, new village. And the idea is that everyone's gonna get along. People are gonna learn how to live together, and it was a big social experiment. But what ended up happening is that after 5 to 10 years, all the white Europeans moved out, and it became more of a slum area. I remember coming through here and taking some photos one day, and as I was walking under one of the buildings, trying to discreetly just take a photo of this area where all the cars had been burned, I heard this whiz past my ear. I realized I heard a crash, and a bottle just broke and shattered at my feet, and I heard another shoom past my ear. And people were somewhere on the 10th floor above me. They were raining down bottles at me because, number one, they could tell I wasn't from there, I didn't belong there, and they were trying to send me a message: get out. And it was really difficult. It was scary at first, but it really helped me to realize how isolated some of these places are. The police, if there's ever a crime or some kind of thing that they need to come in and investigate, they will not come in unless they have full riot gear. In fact, the firemen, if they come to put out a fire, oftentimes will get pelted with rocks and be threatened, yelled at, and screamed at because they represent the state. There's such enmity and anger and angst against the establishment because of the way people feel like they've been mistreated and marginalized and deprived, because many of these neighborhoods are just there's a lot of trafficking, there's a lot of neglect, a lack of opportunity. And so in Villeneuve, this new village that was built as like a utopian, idealistic place is now, if you look over on the right, has just become a forgotten slum. And here you can see where cars have been burned right here. You can always tell where there's a car burning because the pavement looks like that. And it's just a regular occurrence. It's the way that people express their frustration and their anger at what they feel is the injustice of what they live in. But it's also hidden, you know. It's an area where, you know, if you live in another part of the city, you have no idea what's going on. And you can see, if you live here, you never get to see the mountains. Mm-hmm. All you see is concrete. All you see is, you know, slum. You do have Eastern European gangs, Albanian mafia. You got the Italian mafia that's here as well. So that kind of organized crime on a much larger scale, where they control all kinds of trafficking and drugs and all. But your sort of neighborhood youth gangs, yeah, a little bit of that. A lot of it would just be a network of drug dealers that control an area. And whether you call that a gang or not, I don't know. You know, it doesn't have the same reputation of like an initiation and having an identity and then having generations that belong to that gang, you know, that kind of thing. I don't think that exists here. There's a growing far right here, much like in the States, that is really concerned about borders, really concerned about immigration and whether crime or the economy is affected by that. And there's a lot of labeling and blame. You know, this is one of the reasons why we're here in Grenoble. Is, you know, we're here doing you know, work with as missionaries, and you know, the whole thing about the good news or the gospel that we feel like we're here to share is the gospel is supposed to be good news. That's what it means in the Greek. It means good news. But you have to ask yourself, what is good news for Europe? And when we were first here, you know, we would listen to these immigrants, some of them second and third generation, and they would say, I've been here my whole life. I speak French perfectly. I have a French first name. I've learned the culture. I'll never be accepted. I've come to realize that no matter what I do, I'll always be a foreigner. The ache in their heart says, I've been here all my life and I've never been invited into a French home ever. And so they want to be a part, they want to be recognized for the effort that they've made, but they feel like it's never good enough. And then on the other side, you've got your typical French person that sees diversity as a threat. In other words, France's view of what unifies us is to eliminate as many differences as possible. So if America is considered to be a melting pot, a country of immigrants, we're all basically immigrants at one point or another, somewhere in our family's past, unless we're First Nations people. We're a mosaic. But France is like a puree. It's everything that makes you stand out and different should be just blended in together to assimilate into what is truly French. And there's a sentiment that sort of wants to blame the fact that they've had to raise the retirement age twice since we've been here. So when we first got here, the retirement age was 60. And at that time, the president, Sarkozy, he proposed a law to raise the retirement age from 60 to 62. And I'm telling you, all hell broke loose. They fought and they fought. They closed the ports down. They closed down refineries. The universities closed. There was protests and fires and it just was, when people went berserk. And part of the reason is this, is that, you know, if you believe that all you have in this life, you know, is after retirement, and your goal is to build yourself a little heaven. For instance, we have about 7 different versions of Lowe's or Home Depot here. They're huge. And if you go on the weekends or during the summer, the parking lots are packed with people because the French, they are one of the number one, their number one culture to renovate and to home improvement stuff. And they're really into it because it's all about improving your castle. It's all you have to look forward to is to retire at an early age and to really enjoy the rest of your life. And so whenever your retirement, your pension is affected, it's like you're touching my heaven. And that's why they react so fiercely and so strongly. And so they want to blame immigrants for the economy, for people being on welfare, for unemployment, and for the fact that their heaven is being affected by, by these immigrants that come in. So here you have an ache in two different people groups' hearts. You've got an ache in a French heart that says, I don't understand these foreigners, these immigrants, these asylum seekers, and our lives are being made more difficult because of them. And then you have an ache on the side of the immigrant who says, I'll never be accepted. So that's why in our association that we have here, we have a student association where we promote cultural understanding. And we say, diversity is something that is enriching to a culture. We don't have to be threatened by it. We can embrace it and realize, wow, this is something that is actually a positive. And we believe that if people would just understand each other better, that they could get along. And when you see cultures come together in harmony and in unity, then that's good news for Europe. And so that's what kind of we're all about, is we're trying to tap into this inner ache and hurt in people's hearts, or suspicion or fear, and see that kind of give way to cultural understanding, where people accept each other and learn to appreciate diversity because they understand each other better. And so that's why our student ministry, our university work is called Remix. It's taking something from all different parts and making a brand new song out of it. And that's kind of what we're all about.
And that does it from Grenoble, France. But I want to give Mark here an opportunity to share a little bit about what he does here. Why are you in Grenoble? And how long have you been here? What's your job here? And maybe how can people support what you're doing?
Yeah, well, we've been here since 2010, so that makes 14 years this summer. We came here from Bangladesh, where we did NGO work, and we were meeting felt needs, and we were, being that part of the gospel as a missionary, where, we're sharing the love and the good news of Jesus. I mean, that's why we're here as well. So what we do is we run a couple of associations. We started them, a student association that promotes culture and helps international students to integrate into French culture and society, and helps French people to understand internationals as well, and bring those two together in a way that really it demonstrates to the European community what's possible through the reconciliation and the acceptance and the love of diversity that Jesus modeled for us. That kind of evolved into also a church, a very unorthodox, sort of a non-traditional church for people who would never walk into the doors of a normal church. We call it Starbucks Meets Pier 1 Imports. It's a place where everybody belongs, and we call it a safe place to explore faith. So, here in France, there is kind of a bias against, religion and traditional, institutional religion. And so we're trying to be as unreligious as possible and just love people. And so through that, we're trying to be Jesus' hands and arms extended. So we've had a ministry to immigrants and also to an anti-trafficking ministry. We have a 24/7 prayer house that's in the inner part of the city that is there and available to pray for the blessings of the city of Grenoble, and also to be available when people are hurting and people have needs, that we're right there in the middle of the most needy places to say, hey, Jesus loves you, and how can we help you? That's really what we're here. We're here to just be the arms and the voice and the love of Christ expressed to a community that probably has grown up to misunderstand him. I know there was a Eastern European theologian that said maybe the church's greatest job is to wash the face of Jesus. And what that means is, like, if you were to go to a cathedral here, you might see a statue of Jesus, and maybe through corrosion and time and weather, the face has kind of gotten all blackened. And that's what's happened. I think the true face of Jesus has been blackened by, frankly, the actions and and attitudes and the things of even some that would call themselves his followers. And so we're just trying to do that. We're trying to be as much as we can a representation of we see the real gospel and meeting human needs. So, you know, the way that you could help us, we rely on the donations of supporters and people that want to invest in what we do among anti-trafficking, among immigrants, among students. And so we have 3 associations that are nonprofits that could be donated to. And also we take volunteers, people that were wanting to come and just get their hands dirty and to experience what it's like to be in cross-cultural serving and serving a community. We take anywhere from, you know, 3 weeks to 3 months to 3 years of people that would love to come and be a part of our team. We have a training hub that's here where people come to learn language and culture, and so we're a training hub where we mobilize people out to other needy places and projects here in France. And so another way you could help is just to come and volunteer. So we'd love to have you.
All right. All right, thanks, Mark. It was great to see you, and hopefully you'll get some people to come over here because of this. And it's a beautiful town. I'd move here if I could right now, because it is amazing. It's got a good mix of everything. But we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.